For me, it's always about how can I present this model in the best light possible? The actual building, that's always the biggest chunk of any project. And I would say half the time of that whole build process is just planning.
Can you maybe walk us through that process a little bit?
We almost kind of get shoehorned into this line of thinking. The more you can look at the bits for their constituent parts, the more versatility you can get from what you've got. It does require a bit more clipping and adjusting and to get those parts together. But that's the next step from just using parts from one Space Marine kit with another Space Marine kit.
Hello everyone and welcome to Paint Perspective, episode 97. James, we've got a great guest this week. I'm very excited for.
Very excited for this conversation. Yeah. It's the king of conversion. We have Mr. Pete The Wargamer.
Welcome, Pete, to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Coming on
yeah,
the podcast.
thank you very much. I'm super excited for this one.
I am. I'm a personal fan of your channel, so it's very nice to get to chat with you.
That's good. We've been trying to do this for a while, haven't we?
I know, yeah. The stars have aligned this time, which is great. So, yeah.
So this is coming out a little bit delayed for the listeners, but you've just come off the back of Salute at the weekend, which is an event in London. How did that go for you?
It was really good. It was the first time that I've been selling my Dead Animal Bits kits. So it's the first time I've actually been able to kind of be out in public and interact with people who've either already picked it up or were buying it for the first time that day. But it's just been, the feedback was really great. And it's always a convention. It's tiring, but it's always great fun. So I do enjoy them.
Nice.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, I honestly, I was blown away when you brought this out because there's so many cool little bits on here. And I want to say this, there's never, obviously got the Skulls kit from GW and all that kind of stuff, but specifically some of the things that you've done on here, I've never seen anyone do them ever before. And it's great that you've done it because it fills that market gap map perfectly. And especially for the things, I think I mentioned it just off camera, Carl Carradines, things like that. The shark jaws, amazing. So
we're talking about the Dead Animal Bits because you've literally just presented them to us in seconds.
I know,
we've been nerding out over them and I was like, we must start the episode now.
Yeah, they're sick. Yeah, they're great.
These are fantastic. Really, can I give you kudos as well for doing these on a proper plastic screen?
I know.
Well, this is the thing. When I had there was a lot of people who kind of were kind of pushing me into doing this. It's something I wanted to do for a while. But it was one of those ideas where no one else has really done it. So it's either a really bad idea, which is why no one's done it, or it's just something no one's really kind of have gone ahead before. But obviously, with it being plastic, it does involve a lot more.
Yeah, well, the tooling.
There's a lot more kind of time and cost, and everything's got to be sculpted in a way that can go through the HIPS plastic molding process.
Yeah.
But one of the things I'm really proud of is the sculptor, Catherine. She did a really great job on the ram's horns.
Yeah.
So getting something which has got a spiral to go into a two-part mold is actually really difficult. But she's done it in such a way that, and the guys the sprue engineers, you still have that spiral, but it still goes through with it being a single part. So it's there's really, really little things on there, which is I'm really, really pleased with. And everything's single piece as well, but because it's plastic, you can cut it down, you can shape it, adjust it as and when you need to. But it's just really easy to work with.
Yeah, for sure.
It's great. There's so many different options you can use it as well. I totally didn't realize, I've got to say this. So when I was at Salute, Pete had this massive rib cage on the desk, huge. Obviously it's a 3-up, or I don't know what up it is, but it's a crazy thing. But I quickly glanced at it. I actually said this to you at Salute. I quick glanced as I was walking by, and it looked like, remember those doves that float on the angle?
Yeah.
Yeah, it looked like a stack of those when I first saw it. And I was like, I had to go over and have a look at it quickly. But I realised now it's just a 3-up, obviously, of what you got on the sprue.
It's just a big version of it. I think, so Ross from Warhammer basically just, I spoke to him last week, and I was like, I was having trouble doing it myself, and he was like, I'll print one for you.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I said, well, just do it as big as you can. And he came back up with that. I was like, okay, that's a lot bigger than I thought.
It's nearly the size of a full rib cage. It's which is great. No, but they're fantastic. I said, especially, like I said, for Carl Carradines, the shark jaws are amazing.
Yeah.
I think for anything, really, because some of the pieces are quite somewhat generic and universal in the sense of, I know traditionally with your channel, it's like kitbashing the miniatures, but even little things like basing, it's nice to have some variety because it's so cliche almost to put a skull on a base these days, and even just something slightly different, like having a rib cage or something. It's even though it's the same flavor, at least it's a little bit visually different.
Yeah, because obviously the Citadel skulls and the Battlefield Trophies kits have got skulls and heads down, so I've tried to avoid doing any skulls on this. There's some severed heads, but they've still got the flesh on them. So they're a bit more of a freshly taken trophy.
Yeah, they're great.
There are hands on there as well, which is timed really nicely with Trench Crusade because everything seems to have hands nailed to it on there. So that's come out really good. But I think the thing I'm most pleased about is the rib cages, because they work really nicely over shoulder pads, and I used one for a chaplain as well, just like for the armor on the chest.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
But yeah, I made it as generic as possible. There's no real range it's designed for. It's just 28mm, slightly heroic scale, so the hands are a little bit bigger, the head's a bit bigger.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can use it for pretty much anything. And I want it to be as generic as possible, because the problem I always have is we're doing a kit bash, and you have a great idea for a kit bash, and you're trying to find that one piece, and you get it, and you've got to buy a whole like squad of 10 models for like one thing.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, let's kind of curate a bunch of those parts, and they had to be dead animal bits, because it's just ended up being a catchphrase on the channel. So I thought, well, let's go for that for the first one and see how we go. But even like the antlers, I think originally the best place to find antlers was the Sister of the Thorn kit, and you get like 10 antlers in that kit, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's more than that on probably one sprue. So
I think the thing I like about it most as well is the fact that like all the things that you put on there, they're not generic to like fantasy or sci-fi. Literally, you shot straight down the middle, and like they all tailor themselves. Like I could see some of the antlers like used on like elf models and stuff like that, or like you got some really good opportunities to make some interesting conversions, or even basing detail here, like just from using it. So yeah, I like the little subtle first one. That means there must be some other bits and bobs in being worked on, which I'm obviously very excited about. But yeah, like this is like for me. I mean, we spoke the other week on the episode actually that is coming out recently. That conversion, I'm like hugely a big fan of conversion. So like stuff like this is like my jam. I absolutely love the chance to get sort of like random bits and bobs to just chuck in the bits box, or to add stuff to models, which is great.
Can I ask something about designing this?
Yeah.
Was there anything, because obviously they're on the plastic sprue.
Yeah.
So I find, as someone who's never really designed a product necessarily, but I obviously work with a lot of them, you know, building miniatures and such. Sometimes when I look at a piece on a sprue, I'm really confused as to why it was like put in a certain place or made that way. You know, sometimes you're putting a kit together and you're like, why is his arm in like 9 pieces? Right? Why can't they just do it in one? So was there anything in like designing these parts that had to potentially be adjusted, or wasn't quite what you was expecting when it came to putting it all together?
So the guys at Wargames Atlantic, who are the guys who actually produced this sprue for me, they have like the sprue engineers who work for that. They're really great, because they came back. We went through a few iterations of deciding how much of what was going to go on the sprue, and it was kind of, we came up with a bare minimum of what we needed. So I think they populated the sprue with that, and then anything where there was a gap, they just stuck a little thing in there. So I think the feathers, like the small things like feathers and things like that. But I think if you look at the sprue, you can see where the biggest things tend to congregate in the middle.
Right.
And I think that's where the actual plastic's injected from. So it makes sure that those cavities fill out in the sprue. I mean, I'm not an expert in this at all, but it's quite interesting to see that process from someone who is kind of a layman, who knows enough about it going into it, but not enough to actually do it themselves. And yeah, the fantastic work and how they adjust things and how they move things around so that you get as much of a kind of like detail in there as possible, while still adhering to that limitation of the 2-part mold process. But yeah, I think they did a fantastic job, and as did the sculptor Catherine. She's already worked. Fortunately, she was aware of working with this kind of technology. As well, I say technology, it's old as time, that is. But it's just 2 bits of metal sandwiched together. But you have to kind of contemplate that, and when you're actually designing everything.
Yeah.
So I think the way maybe that other models are built is they are sculpted as an entire model and then cut down later, whereas these were designed from the ground up with that in mind.
Okay, that's quite interesting.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Okay, well, let's get onto the channel then, of course.
Yeah.
I'm interested in you, Pete, because you're one of those channels where the product is kind of what you're doing, right? We don't get to learn too much about you.
Okay.
So I want to know, who is Pete? What is your background on the hobby? How did you get into all of this stuff? And how do you ultimately end up, making this massive YouTube channel that you have?
So going back now. So I started when I was about 11 or 12. It was when the Battle Games of Middle Earth magazine came out. I think a lot of people my age got into it that way. So it was the Lord of the Rings range that Games Workshop had at the time, and they had like a fortnightly magazine, and it was the first issue was Moria Goblins, So you got a sprue of Mario Goblins, 4 paints, a dice, a paintbrush for £1.99.
That is insane.
Is that like the OG Combat Patrol magazine?
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah.
And then every subsequent week was like it was like fortnightly, so it was £3.99, but it's still really good.
That's still not too bad. Like normally when you get onto when you have one of those magazine series, the first one is like 99p or £1.99, and then it goes to like £8.
And then before you know it, you're £900 deep on a Spitfire model.
But it was great. It ran for quite a few years, I think. But by the end of it, you would have so many like different models, but they're all like Games Workshop models. You'd always get a full sprue, or you get like a full character model or something like that. But even the magazine was fantastic. Like the actual information you got in there about the painting and scenery building, and there's even like little bits of conversions in there as well, which is kind of, if you look back at the old White Dwarfs from back then, there was a lot more kind of emphasis on conversions, and that's where I think I got that original inspiration from.
Kind of right from the start then.
Yeah. So I've gone into Lord of the Rings first, and then there was a club at school which was run by my history teacher.
Oh wow! Awesome.
So he was big into like historical kind of wargaming, so he kind of already had access to like a few tables and stuff. So he'd bring them in on like, I think it was like a Tuesday after school, and we'd play that. And there's a few of the kids who were in the older years who had 40k, and I got in through that
cool
way.
Kids.
Yeah, cool kids in the group, not in the school. Unfortunately.
There's a hierarchy of
Yeah, so we got into 40k, played a bit of Warhammer Fantasy at the time, and I kind of did that thing that a lot of people seem to do when you get to university and you don't have any money.
The gap.
So you just kind of fall out of the hobby, and then I came back to it probably like early 20s again, and then that's roughly when the channel started. And the channel came about by accident, really, because I had a blog which I used to just use it as a way of kind of keeping a log of the projects that I've worked on.
Stuff.
Because I'd had stuff when I was younger, and I'd either sold it or traded it, and I kind of lost those models that I worked on. So I thought I'll keep this, and if I don't have the models in the future, I can go back and look at the pictures. And then I kind of fell into doing some article writing for a company at the time was called Talk Wargaming. So I did some articles for them, and then I did a few tutorials as well. And I'd done some tutorials on my own. I think I don't know if the channel's still going. It's called The Fraying Paintbrush, and that was like my first channel that I did. And that was like very, very basic stuff. I think if the videos are still there, they're pretty bad. But that was like 12 years ago now, 12, 13 years ago. So it's quite a while. And then the Pete The Wargamer channel started as the Talk Wargaming YouTube channel. And then it became The Wargamer because it was like TWG. So it had the same initials. So I kept that. And then I just thought I'll put Pete in there as well, just make it a bit more
personal.
But it's awesome. just kind of grew from there. But I didn't always do kitbashing on the channel. It was something I always did here and there, but I never thought there was a huge audience for it. I think I just looked on YouTube and everyone else just did painting tutorials. So I just assumed that, I guess like the kit, I just assumed that, maybe other people tried it, it's not worked. But I did a few more because I used to convert a lot myself, and people seem to enjoy it and enjoy that more than the painting. So I thought, well, I'll just do this thing because I enjoy the kit bashes as well. So and that was like 11 years ago now. So
YouTube has changed a lot in those. Obviously, you've had experience, as you said, like for 12, 13 years of doing YouTube. Like YouTube has changed like massively. We spoke about this on quite a few episodes before, but like it's interesting the way that it was more vloggy back then.
Yeah.
And it's gone like way more like, like the way it's gone now, which is great. So it's really good that you've got that kind of experience from before and all the way through, I think, which is good.
Was you into like video making and stuff before that, or did it kind of happen because you was doing the kit bashing?
Not particularly. It was almost necessity because that just seemed like the easiest way to present what I was doing. Doing the write-ups is you can do a write-up and it is good, and some people prefer those kind of things to go back through. But for what I was doing, it was easier to demonstrate and show someone, if you cut here and cut here and adjust this, then these bits go together, than it was trying to write 3 or 4 paragraphs to explain that one cut.
Right.
So I kind of just fell into doing that, and then I learned as I progressed. My wife, she's a videographer, so she's got a degree in it. She's worked in it. Yeah, exactly. So I had all of the access to the cameras. She taught me the basics of editing and stuff like that. So that's kind of, that helped me out at the beginning.
Was there a lot of critique? Like, you shouldn't have shot it off. You shouldn't have,
there was sometimes I would just, the white balance would be completely off. I'm like, why aren't you setting the white balance? Like, just use auto white balance. You know what I mean? Just do that. Everything's on auto settings. But no, she's been very helpful. She's done some of the editing for me in the past as well when I've needed it. But yeah, it's been very useful to have a kind of guiding hand, especially in the initial startup.
What if I told you can easily take your miniature bases to the next level? Well, now you can with the new basing products from Siege Scenics. Siege Scenics is dedicated to helping you create immersive and realistic environments for your miniatures that feel alive and dynamic, whether you're setting the stage for an epic tabletop battle or telling a rich, unfolding story with your competition display. From the warm hues of autumn to the crisp frost of winter, Siege Scenics has you covered with expertly crafted products that capture the ever-changing beauty of nature and bring it straight to your miniatures. To see the full collection and place your order now, head to siegescenics.co.uk or check the link in this episode's description. In regards to painting then,
yeah,
I mean, you're a great painter as well. It's like one of the things that I think is most overlooked of your channel, because you do this like whole kit bash and then you're like, oh, and here it is painted, by the way.
Yeah.
Right at the end, which is obviously, I understand why you're doing the videos, but obviously we're a painting podcast.
Yeah.
So how did you get into like paint? Because you're a skilled painter, and I don't say that with any disrespect to anyone who's more on the hobbyist side, but I find that it tends to be people don't kind of stumble into that sort of skill by accident. So what was your sort of like learning journey like? I know you said you painted when you were young.
Yeah, so my dad he paints like on canvas basically. He's always painted on canvas. He did it a lot more like when he was younger, and then he's got back into it now. He's kind of semi-retired. So I think I always got encouraged as a kid to do more like artsy stuff, and I've always drawn and sketched and stuff like that. And then I kind of fell out of doing that as I got older, but then almost the outlet became painting miniatures. So I just built up and just practiced, and I've been doing it for 23 years now. So it's just over time, just practice. But I think even just in the progression of doing the channel, I guess it really depends what your reason for painting is. If you're a competition painter, then obviously you've got that competition level to push you to improve. Whereas for me, it's always about how can I present this model in the best light possible? And if I can paint the model so that it looks like it was intended to be that way, or it was built from a kit, and I can have that almost Games Workshop style to it as well. It kind of helps people relate that final product to stuff that you can build normally. So with a kit bash, you can actually create some nice looking stuff. It doesn't have to be quite janky, which some of my earlier stuff was, to be fair, and every now and again it still is. But yeah,
I think that's one of the things though when you are converted, and like the reason I love it so much is it's transforming the vision or thought of how to do something and then manifesting it with the miniature. And I think one of the things is that there, like you rightly just said, then there are so many pitfalls when you're doing conversion, because you think, oh, if I just cut it there, it should go on there okay, and then something else will pop out of nowhere, and you'll be like, actually, that's not going to work now. Like, and it's almost like it's problem solving, but in a really creative way, which is the thing I love about, which is what I love about converting like massively. See, one of the things, touching on the painting as well, that I was going to say is that one of the things I really love about your videos is that you'll a good portion of the video is obviously talking about the concept, the idea, all that kind of stuff. And normally there's a lot of like different, obviously, videos over on YouTube from all the years of conversion and seeing how to do something, etc. But with yours, it's like it's bookended, because you get the full process of like the explanation, the theory, the actual doing it. Then it finishes with the perfect rotation of the model, showing it fully painted as well. So like
the painted is the cherry on top for me. Because I think it'd be so easy for you to do your videos without the painting bit at the end.
Yeah.
But that little bit of extra effort, I think, is so
it's
worthwhile
great.
for people.
Yeah,
it's like you said, it presents it to people in a way that allows them to. You're taking the guesswork out of it, because sometimes I find that when I'm looking at, even with our like custom service models of Siege, for example, me as a hobbyist, I'm looking at a miniature, and sometimes it's hard to visualize. You know, there's like a green stuff like blend or something. You've got a little different colors going on, different parts. It might be like, a Space Marine. It's got a blue arm because that was from some weird little kit, and then the rest of it's grey, and there's some sculpted stuff. And sometimes it can be quite like busy to look at.
Yeah.
But when it's painted, it all makes sense and it all comes together.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's, especially when you're using different materials like green stuff, and you've maybe got like a little bit of brass in there or guitar string or anything like that, it can look very messy. And I know some people will do that, and then they'll post like a grayscale version, so they can kind of see what it looks like as if it was like grey plastic.
Yeah.
But I think if I'm going to I spend most of the time on the actual building, that's always the biggest chunk of any project. And I would say half the time of that whole build process is just planning, because you have to go through, it's either spending hours on the Games Workshop site, looking through the sprues that you've got to hand, going on mini compare and kind of checking the scales work out with things. So you don't have to like find the bits and then manually compare them. But yeah, so much goes into the planning. Some of it ends up being going out the window when you actually start building it. So you think, oh, I've got this fantastic idea. I'm going to use this shoulder pad. And when you build it and you put the shoulder pad on, it's like completely the wrong size or the wrong shape. And then you think, well, I'm going to have to go back to the drawing board, and you almost have to start that whole planning process again then, because maybe that was like a linchpin part of the build.
Do you ever get quite deep into a project and have to abandon
it? It's not too often, but it does happen. I think the planning, this is why I do the planning, because that almost tries to eliminate as many of those pitfalls as possible. But there have been things where I've worked on it and it's just not quite worked out. Or I've had an idea, and I think I've got an idea for a project, and it's basically, I've got all the bits for it and they've all been clipped off and compared, and I've not made any big cuts to them, but they've been on my desk for about 18 months now, just sat in like a little tray of just waiting for me to get around to it. But it just hasn't had that idea that will bring it all together.
Where does it start? Does it start with the idea, or do you see a part and then go, or a kit even, and go, I want to do something to that? Where does it start?
It varies, which is a really vague answer.
No, it's all good.
Yeah, so sometimes I have an idea and I'm like, I want to build that. Like I'll see a piece of artwork, or there'll be something that maybe there'll be, especially with the old world releases, there have been some rules that have been released but no miniatures for them. So I think, well, how can I build that? So I work backwards from the idea. Sometimes it'll be a model. So like with Fulgrim. So I think this will go out by the time I've released it. So I can talk about it. So I'm in the process of converting into a chaos version of Vulcan.
Oh my God.
So
that is so funny.
I was not expecting that.
Yeah. So I've kept the big kind of snake body. I've covered up that kind of weird symbol that he's got on the front of him with like a big loincloth and some scales. So it's like it's like a
salamander cloak.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah. I'm literally so excited to see this.
I've got to rewind you though. Where does that idea come from?
How did that even come
out? You see the new Fulgrim models coming out, and you're like, oh, that's cool. Oh yeah, obviously.
It's kind of become almost an expectation that if a new Primarch's released now, I do something. I convert into a different version of a Primarch or a Chaos version of it or something. So it was more of a case that Fulgrim came out, and I looked at the model. I was like, who can I turn that into? So that started out with the model. I was like, what can I do with this model to make it? So he's got obviously wings. So I've kind of made the Vulcan's got a. So I've used a Croxagore head.
Oh my God.
And then I've got Magmadroth horns on him, so it looks like a dragon. The wings work really well. I've used some the hammer from the Halbrook kit.
Okay, yeah.
It's sized really perfectly, so it's just got like a big hammer now.
Yeah.
Instead of a sword.
That's amazing.
But yeah, he's currently on my desk. He's built, but I'm going to be painting this week and hopefully get the video out.
That's absolutely. I thought you were going to throw absolute insult to injury to all the Iron Hand fans out there and do him as like a first man, like a resurrected first Spanos or something like that.
Well, the thing is, I really like the alternate heresy series, because they're just really kind of interesting for if you're not really too worried about like sticking to the lore. It's just a good way of experimenting with different. Because everyone knows that if it's Slaanesh, it's going to be Emperor's Children, so they almost associate the Slaanesh aesthetic with the Emperor's Children aesthetic, and you can see that if you look at the 30k stuff. So it's always it's almost like a thought experiment or a challenge for myself to see how can I extract that Slaanesh element and then apply that to a completely different legion who has their own. So I did the Slaaneshi White Scars. So I had to approach it differently. So the Emperor's Children. So I do also deep dive into the lore and the background and where these kind of things come from. So that what I do is lore accurate to a degree, but then like an alternate version.
That's awesome.
So I do go quite heavy into that aspect as well. So with the White Scars, they're kind of very, they've got like a very aggressive fighting style. So I thought, well, how can I translate that to being actually corrupted, so they lean more into like the 7 deadly sins. So there's a guy who's like wrath, and there's a guy who's greed, and like gluttony. He's like a butcher, so he's got like hunks of meat. Like,
That's amazing.
So yeah, just try to take Slaanesh and then see how that would look. And same with this with the Vulcan, like what would a salamander look like if they had fallen to chaos?
That is rad. Honestly, that is wild.
Is there any sort of source inspiration for these ideas, or is it just all in your own brain?
No, there's a lot of really good art on Instagram. Like some fantastic art. I can never remember from the top of my head, so I do apologize. But there's some people who do a lot of the Dornian heresy art, and there's the Lionel heresy art as well. And there's someone else who recently popped up, and I'm just blanking about who they are, but I follow them on Instagram. But I follow that many people on Instagram. It's going to be really hard to find. So they're an illustrator, like a sci-fi illustrator. And the way they have approached 40K is they've completely redesigned the races. So the one that struck out the most for me was like the Eldar aren't humanoid or elf-like at all. They're like a bottom half is like a worm or a snake, and then the top half is like tendrils, and then the heads are in like 2 pieces.
Okay.
So everything's very much more alien, and it works really well. And the humans look like humans, but Space Marines are just this like huge kind of block of. They don't look human at all. Basically, they're completely different. It's really hard to explain it because it's so different.
You'd have to send me. I'll have to send it to you.
Yeah, and maybe you can put them in. But the Tyranids are the most interesting ones because if you imagine the old kind of 50s style sci-fi robot that was like the little toys that were like all blocky.
Yeah.
If you imagine one of those but made out of organic matter.
Okay.
And that's how they've done the Tyranids.
Oh, right. Okay.
So they're more like these kind of biological robots. But
that's interesting. That's
it's so interesting. It's that kind of stuff that always makes me think we almost kind of get shoehorned into this line of thinking so much because every race is pretty much humanoid with the exception of the Tyranids. But why would everything be humanoid?
No, I get that.
You're going to have stuff which is going to be very different. And
that's really interesting. But do you think it is like that because then it's easier for someone to align with it because it's more
somewhat relate to it?
Relatable.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's probably why. But I think also it's a strange thing because people often ask me, why do you do humans? Why do you do Space Marines mainly? Why don't you do other races? And I think the reason being is because humans are the default in those kind of settings. We're the race that we most closely associate ourselves. So we can kind of almost think about the nuances and the differences between people who've got different origins and backgrounds and how they would be developed differently. But when you've got something which is alien, they diverge less. So if you think about all the different craft worlds, whilst in the lore they'll be different, that very rarely gets reflected on the tabletop or in the miniatures themselves, other than a color scheme. Same with orcs, you have like the different tribes of exactly. And again, I think the beast snaggers are probably the most different in that regard.
100%.
And I feel like maybe people used to do a lot more in like I said, the old White Dwarf, people used to go a lot more ham on the conversions. And
I really miss those days. Like the old White Dwarfs. I mean, I'll show you. I haven't shown you yet downstairs, but I've got like a massive White Dwarf collection, like huge, and like that's my like childhood. Like I remember getting my very first White Dwarf, and my favorite things in there were the conversion things. It's where seeing how people would, and that's how I kind of got into it because I very much similar to yourself. Like the conversion articles in there were like some of my favorite things because you just see like how someone's made a completely different miniature that still fits really well into the overall grand scheme of like 40k and what it is or whatever game it's for, whether it's Necromunda or whatever. But it looks totally different. Like one of my favorite things was when Inquisitor, the 54 mil came out, and seeing how the because there was only limited models for Inquisitor back in the day, seeing how people actually approached making their own character for Inquisitor by taking one of the 20 stock models that was released, and then using 40k bits that are for like bigger models that then work on the like I think someone made a lightning claw out of like a dreadnought with the claws from the dreadnought, for example, and it works really well. So like that's kind of like exactly like yourself. That's one of my earliest memories of conversion was from the White Dwarfs. So I used to love those articles.
Yeah. It's interesting what you said though about the aliens always being presented as humanoid to some degree. I haven't really thought about how thorough that goes until I'm picturing all the models in my head. I'm like, no, they are all like bipedal figures with a gun.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's the same with like with fantasy as well. It's the same. You've got lizard men, which just lizard men. Literally.
Give him some scales off he
goes.
Yeah,
exactly. So, and it's kind of interesting to see how it makes sense in like the fantasy setting more than it does in the kind of the 40k setting, because you've got this like huge galaxy spanning races, and everyone kind of looks a bit like a human. Maybe they're a bit taller, a bit shorter, different colored like skin.
No, definitely. Yeah, I'm thinking about it now. The only other models in either game system that are less humanoid are probably some of the demon models. I think that's probably the only ones that.
Even then, though, I mean, like the core units are.
I mean,
I think Tzeentch's probably the most one.
Yeah, Tzeentch, you're right.
Even if you think about just like a Zangor, you know what I mean? Like the rank and file is always very humanoid. Big news, some huge updates have arrived to the Siege Studios Patreon to give you brand new perks and includes even more bonus content. Our refreshed tiers include extended ad-free episodes of this podcast, including our new post show, extended masterclass video tutorials with bonus tips and techniques, invitations to hobby hangouts with us, exclusive Discord channels, and of course, instant access to hundreds of easy-to-follow, step-by-step PDF tutorials updated every single month. And you can even get dedicated video feedback of your miniatures with our critique clinic, so you'll always know what skills you need to improve next. So what are you waiting for? Take the next leap in miniature painting and improve your skills for the same price as just a few pots of paint. Head to patreon.com/Siege Studios to learn more. One thing I find is interesting is when you speak to people, like you said about the artwork, the kind of the less prerequisite knowledge you have of a universe and like the correct lore, the more open and free and creative people can be. So I find that often I really enjoy the books, for example, but the further you go down that rabbit hole, the more you start policing your miniatures and like what's correct. Whereas there's something quite freeing about like what you said about, you know, kitbashing Vulcan into and Fulgrim, and
that's nuts.
It's completely opposite and backwards, but I think it resonates with a lot of creativity from yourself, but also it's nice that you've not got like blinders onto the lore and stuff, because it's nice to use that as like source material and reference and a source of inspiration, but to be able to break free of that is really interesting.
And I think that is also requires so when it's a double-edged sword really. When you're working within the constraints of the law, you've got set boundaries, so that's good because it means that you already have kind of somewhere to work from, but then it does also restrict you. But when you're working something yourself, you've got total freedom, but you've still got to have the thought, well, if this is the same universe but that just went in a different direction at a certain time, the laws of that universe still exist in some way, but they're just been applied differently. So that is always trying. It's trying to find that balance between the two. And sometimes it's good to do something that's really like, even if it's just an obscure bit of lore that you kind of deep dive into. There's one there's a build that I've been wanting to do for a while but never got around to. It was there used to be a half Eldar chief librarian of the Ultramarines. I just love to do that because it really just throw people.
People go lose their minds.
I forgot about that. It was quite early on, wasn't it?
Very
quite early on in the origins of GW lore. It was like the Eldar and the Space Marines. What was the relation? They were they an offspring of each other or something?
I'm completely ignorant to this. I remember it as a thing, but I don't remember the backstory as to why.
I think it was supposed to be a little bit of a nod to Spock, how he's like half Vulcan, half human.
Oh, right.
So it's kind of like that kind of.
It was Rogue. Was it Rogue? It was Rogue. It must have been Rogue Trader.
I think it was. I think it was Rogue Trader, but it was like one of the very early. It was very early iterations. I'm sure people will be in the comments correct.
Someone will correct.
So would you use like artwork as inspiration for creating that, or would it kind of be your own thing?
So I'd probably go. I mean, there is a miniature that exists, but I would then have to think, well, how would I translate that into like modern? How would that work in my? So I think the most recent one of the more recent Primarch builds that I did was I took the idea of. So I've kind of created my own alternate universe now because I've got to the point. So I started off with doing.
Was it Conrad Kurz?
Yeah, so it was Conrad Kurz. I did him as the loyalist version using the Lion Kit.
That was it,
And then I did Conrad Kurz again, but a few people. So what I really like is how tragic the Primarch stories are in some cases. And so I did one with Angron, who as if he'd been raised by orcs instead of. But he's kind of got this. So obviously, if he was an infant, he could probably do quite a lot of damage. And obviously, orcs grow bigger when they get stronger. So he's got this almost. So I assume that. All this kind of like war energy has just made him really big. So he's the size of the actual full-on demon anger on.
Yeah.
But he's still like got like normal like skin tone. But he's just like painted a bit green, and he's wearing like Ghazghkull Thraka armor. So I built him, and I thought, okay, well, what else can I do with this universe? So I thought, well, what about if Comrade Kurz, he's basically got the gift of foresight, and so do the Eldar seers. So what if he was raised by the Eldar? How would he go down that line? And I've got this. I came up with this whole backstory where he's been honed as like sight, as foresight. So he wears a helmet that's like almost like a sensory deprivation chamber, so he can see what's happening on the battlefield before it happens.
That's incredible.
He's
incredible.
So I've kind of think about, and I've come up with a backstory, and then at the end of the video, I have this like that random like backstory that I've written out for it. And I don't know if anyone watches to that far in the end of the video, but there's about 5 minutes of just this lore dump that I've come up with at the end.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and I'm working on the setting, but the idea is that it's almost the Harlequin god, I think
I can't remember the name,
Chagarath or something. I've called it like the Chagorian Gambit or something like that, but he's like a manipulator, and the idea is he intercepted the primarchs in the webway.
Oh right,
when they kind of been scattered in the war. Yeah, and he's sent them to the places where they would make the most damage to chaos.
Right, okay.
So he's sent them to the Eldar and the Orcs, so it can fight, and the humans have kind of then, because they've never had the primarchs. In that setting, they're a lot smaller. They're probably similar to like maybe the Votan or the Tau or something like that.
That's awesome.
But I may do like a Votan Primarch, or a lot of people want me to do a Tyrannid one, but I'm not sure how I'm going to do that. So
I don't know how you do that.
I think I'm likely to do something along the Gene Stealer route. I think maybe making like a Primarch.
So as if he had the seed put into him basically.
Yeah, so I either that, or he basically. Yeah, so it's something landed on a planet that had a Gene Stealer cult kind of growing on it. The timelines are a little bit squiggly, but with the warp you can kind of explain that away. He's almost like grown into the point where there's the four-armed emperor is what the Gene Stealer cult. So I'll basically make him into the four-armed emperor. I'm not sure who to do with that yet.
That's great.
But yeah, there's so many.
You probably have to go down the route of maybe using Gulliman's body because he's got a lot of Detalia from the Emperor potentially. Like you could do something like that. It could like quite cool. I think our favorite one we spoke about last week, one of our favorite, most bonkers. And that's touching upon the point you were saying about like using the lore as like as a guide, etc. But like we've done a CS model in the past whereby it's the one I'm going to say hopefully, but it's an Ordo Xenos Inquisitor that has somehow managed to wrangle a flying hive tyrant as like a hang glider.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Okay. And he's got like he commands a whole swarm of nids because he's obviously psychic. So he boosts his psychic ability through the hive tyrant, and he's got like this hang glider thing attached to the thing. So it's crazy CS job we've ever done.
It's like those Grey Knights baby carriage.
Oh yeah.
But a hive tyrant.
Cool. It's crazy, honestly.
Yeah.
But you think about it and you think, maybe it's Ordo Xenos, so they kind of do use like Xenon.
Oh, you can justify any of this stuff. That's the fun part about having an evolving sci-fi universe.
Yeah.
You can make up anything.
Yeah.
It can be absolutely mental. And as long as you justify it well enough, you can get away with it. Yeah. If you make it make sense.
Yeah. I mean, I really think that so many people limit themselves in what they can do because they just want to stick so close to the lore. And I'm thinking, if you just kind of have a bit of fun with it, maybe use it as a jumping off point, you can do some like ridiculous stuff and build a baby carrier, tyrant, but yeah.
I always say people stick to the lore. James kind of mentions this a little bit. People stick to the lore as if it's like true and happened. Yeah. And I'm like, you know that guy made it up though, right? Yeah. Like the guy that wrote that book thought of it. So why can't you think of your own stuff?
It's hard because I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Pete, but it's good time to have a chat about it. But so I kind of see, I've always said this, I kind of see 40K as like science fiction historical modeling, if that makes sense. It's like there is a pre-established, well, this is this. And you do, I suppose it's easy to have a linear approach of looking at a faction or looking at a character and doing it as it is. But I think when it comes to actually making models and when I try and do conversion and stuff, I try and make something that is my own thing that's creative, but it also, someone would look at it and go, I could easily fit into the thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, I think that's like, as much as it is limiting to an extent, obviously, where you can't paint Ultramarines pink or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Or things like that. I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't. You could just say it's an offshoot chapter or something. But the point I'm trying to make is that I think it should be more of guidance. And if you are going to do your own crazy things and just if you do want to do like an alternate timeline, that's perfectly fine. But if you're trying to keep it within the time frame, it's like the Tyranid hang glider. It's like finding the best way to
like justify
how it would work because of this reason. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally. Yeah, I think there's enough wiggle room. Even if you want to stick to like very rigidly to what's established, there's enough wiggle room there to do a lot of stuff and still kind of get away with it.
Yeah.
But I think that's fine. I think if people enjoy reading up on the lore and having like this encyclopedic knowledge of it, that's fine.
100%,
I've got no problems with that. And if people want to go really specific, granular detail and doing stuff,
that stuff's almost cool in its own way.
Yeah,
because there are people that do like 30k.
Well, I was going to say that
really specifically because that you've got that kind of book series. Start to finish, you know what happens within it, so you can kind of stick to it, like the scale modeling, kind of like you said.
Yeah.
But when you've got like these growing universes like 40k, I think there's more interpretation.
I agree, and I think I've also kind of dipped into a lot of historical modeling in the past as well, and historical models will really chew you out if you don't get it right. More so than 40k, which is surprising.
Yeah.
But I mean, so a lot of the guys are really great, but some people are very, very particular about it because for them it's like that's how they enjoy the history.
Yeah.
And the 30k books, the Horus Heresy stuff, if you look at the way that they present those books and the artwork and they do the heraldry breakdowns, you can see the inspiration from things like how Napoleonic reference books will look and how like even like World War II, World War I, all these like colorful uniforms, and they'll just be depending on what campaign you are or what year you are.
Like you can't have that camouflage for that period or stuff like that.
It's all very specific, and people who enjoy that stuff can really kind of take a lot of pride in researching that and going to town on making sure that everything is as historically accurate. And I think people have taken that feeling and have applied it to 40k as well. And that's fine if that's how you want to enjoy your hobby, but just don't kind of crap on everyone else.
No, exactly. 100%.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned 30k because I do see 30k very much as like the even more dialed in lore and narrative side of that. And I think what you said about the books is quite right.
It's probably somewhat intentional to a degree because, like I said, it's kind of closed off that chapter in time. Like we know it's in the past in terms of like the current timeline, quote unquote. But that's why you can treat it like kind of historical because it is almost the history to
the science.
The current
exactly, 100%. Yeah, like, but a lot of the team in Forge World and in the design team at the time when the Black Book series was released, I think a lot of them do come from like a scale modeling historical background, whether it's like tanks from World War II or whether it's like Napoleonics or whatever.
I think they signaled that in a way a little bit because before Age of Darkness relaunch, when everything was like resin and whatnot, everyone always said that like the Horus Heresy was a hobby within a hobby. And it was kind of that more niche, like specialist thing.
Yeah. But now it's gone plastic. And I think now that accessibility for people that maybe newer hobbyists that maybe haven't worked with resin and stuff like that, I think it's made it more accessible. But I do still think
affordable as well, obviously.
I do also think as well that like it still retains that like science fiction historical modeling feel to it. If you follow me.
It's kind of cool that it has that though, because then you've kind of got these within the like grander 40k universe. It's like, oh, are you more into like, if, say you're a new person getting in, it's like, oh, if you're more into like historicals and stuff, maybe you came from the scale model world or the Napoleonics or whatever, you might find that resonates with you more than, diving deep into like even Age of Sigmar or something, something a bit more expansive.
And if you want to spend hours making sure that the shoulder pad trim's the right color or that the decals are correct or something, you can do that. And it gives you the options to do it. And I mean, you can see it especially in 30k, there's so much like heavy Roman influence on the legions. I mean, the fact they're called legions and the Solar Auxilia as well, everything's very kind of historically coded in a way as well. So I think there's definitely, that is to Warhammer 40k what like historicals are to like other sci-fi ranges. I think that's probably how I would view that.
It's funny you say that actually, because I always knew that there was like Roman influence in 40k. And then it wasn't until last year I actually went to Rome on holiday and I was walking around. I was like, oh, I'm in like Space Marine land. And you look at stuff and there was loads of stuff that I recognized, not because it was Roman, but because I'd seen it in 40k stuff because my history knowledge isn't great.
I think it's because there's a lot of Latin used in. There's loads of Latin used in 40k, like Imperial Gothic. It's very much a hybrid of like, I suppose maybe English and also like Latin in amalgamation, like words and things like that. So I think that you're quite right. I had that when I went to Rome as well. Like you just look at buildings and look at the architecture, or you look at like the way that the texts are written on certain things. You're like, well, that just looks like I'm strolling around an imperial city. Do you know what I mean? Like, so yeah. But But yeah, I think one of the interesting things you brought up actually is the thing about like the different factions in 40k, and like I orcs are like one of, if not my favorite non-human factions in 40k, and I think that quite rightly what you said, the beast snaggers are like the first of those new ranges which really show a bit more in the sculpt, the flavor and personality of it. I think the only other ones compared to that are freebooters, and there's only like one squad of those that you can buy. So like, because I think like they're like, I think you can have so much hilarity. I think that specifically with converting and sort of like adding like a flavor or fun thing to 40k, I do think that orcs are like literally a converter's like best friend for like what you can do with it. You can literally think of something or see a vehicle from another faction and go, well, do you know what, I fancy one of those in my orc army, and like you can take it. And that's one of the things I think that I love about them as a faction, and just for conversion purposes, I think that they're absolutely brilliant. So
if you're a miniature painter, you'll know how important it is to have the right tools for the hobby, but it doesn't matter what brushes or paints you have if you can't see what you're doing in the first place. If you want to improve your painting, contorting yourself under a small, repurposed lamp from around the house, giving yourself a backache and straining your eyes just isn't going to cut it. That's why one of the biggest upgrades I've ever made to my painting setup was my Onyx painting lamp from Native Lighting. Its articulating arm allows me to sit in the perfect painting position for those long hobby sessions, and its super bright 2200 lumen, dimmable LEDs cast soft and diffused light on my models without any harsh shadows. As someone with a very small hobby space, by far my favourite feature is its adjustable mounting clamp, which attaches to the side of my desk, maximising my free workspace. And its daylight colour balance temperature of 6500K gives you the confidence that colours you are painting are accurate and your miniatures will pop on the tabletop. To upgrade your setup to the equipment we rely on here at Siege Studios, head to the link in this episode's description or go to siegestudios.co.uk/shop. One thing I wanted to ask is, do you have a preference? We've been speaking about lore and stuff, obviously. Do you have a preference for representing certain characters specifically, or like something a bit broader than that, like a race or a unit type or something like that? Because obviously your kit bashes are quite varied. You know, anything from like making a homebrew kill team to, you know, converting a primarch. Is there anything like, do you have any personal preference for like one way or another, or is it just sort of?
I've kind of fallen into just doing a lot of primarchs just because they're very recognizable, and I think because a lot of people know who they are, you can twist that. It's almost like a mirror, like a funhouse mirror kind of thing, where you can distort the image, but because people know what the basis is, it almost emphasizes the differences further. And so that's why I like those characters. And I think other characters are good for that kind of thing, but if they're not as recognizable, people don't necessarily understand or as easily see those differences. But I used to do a lot before. I kind of fell out of the habit of doing it because I used to make plastic versions or primarchs versions of well-known characters that hadn't quite made it into the new range of stuff, and then Games Workshop would just release the model like a year later. So I was like, I'm not going to do that as much anymore, because every time I do it, it just gets really. So I think I did like a Dante at one point, and I did. I've done a few different characters, and they've just been released in plastic. So I stay away from those now.
Have you ever had any like particularly poorly timed ones?
It's not too bad. Everything usually gives me about a year.
Okay, that's not too bad.
Yeah. So I think the most recent so I did it was the second. I think, which edition was it? It was the second 40k edition that had primarchs. Then it had the Blade Guard in the box set.
Oh, that was Indomitus.
Indomitus.
Yeah. So I did that one. So I had the Blade Guard, and I made some Space Wolf Blade Guard. And there's the new ones that are coming out are very, very similar to those. I'm thinking, I know someone's not like copied that. I know that's not what happened, but it's just that we've followed the same design rules that have been set down, and we've kind of looked at how the law would create something, and then the results ended up being the same.
Okay, so circle back a little bit to something we mentioned earlier, which is like the planning of your videos and stuff. Because one thing I'm quite interested in, we spoke about it a little bit on our previous episode. I'm like a total novice kit basher, right? So
got his L plates on.
But I don't have like a big, pile of bits and stuff. So I have to resort to like kind of looking online for like where to find parts and stuff. But say I had like an idea for a character in my head, relating that to like some of your videos, for example, how does it go from like idea in your head to like what does the research look like? What does the part sourcing look like? Like all of the planning that goes, you said there's a lot of planning that goes into the videos. Can you maybe walk us through that process a little bit?
Yeah, so let's take the most recent video because it's most fresh in my mind. Was the like a Vulcan version of using the Fulgrim model. So I in that case, I'd seen the Fulgrim model. And I was like, well, what can I do with this? What can I convert it into? And so I kind of went through my head of like, who haven't I covered yet? Who would work well as like a big giant dragon thing? So obviously Vulcan makes the most sense. So then my next step was I kind of do. So before I got the model, I kind of did a little bit of pre-planning because there's a great website called Mini Compare, which I use so many times because it has you put the model on and then you can put other models on and they've scaled everything.
Oh right, I've never even heard.
It's kind of like a side-by-side photo comparison.
That's awesome.
So they go through and they I don't know if they do pixel heights or base size or something, but they're really accurate actually, and they just take the models that, and even stuff that hasn't been released yet, so they just base it off of what the base size or what there's like recognizable parts in there that would.
That's awesome. I didn't even know that site exists.
I think it's called minicompare.info or something like that. But it's such a useful tool. So the first thing I do is drop as soon as that was on there, which was like pretty much the next day after the reveals, it was on there really quickly. So I put that on there, and this was months ago, so I haven't even like started yet. This is when the first reveals at Adepticon. So was it Adepticon was revealed, or was it sooner than that? It was sooner than that.
Was it Christmas Day?
Christmas Day.
So it's pretty much like just after Christmas. I was doing this. Yeah, I'm thinking about Space Wolves. That's my next plan. So I get them on there, and I just kind of keep comparing different models to it to see what kind of size he is. So what will work in terms of the scale, because scale is such an important thing as well. That people, especially when you're working outside of just like a normal human height, because Space Marine stuff's bigger, and then the primarch stuff's bigger than that, and then the demon primarch's even bigger, and then you've got monsters. So scale plays a massive part in getting stuff and taking stuff from that's a different scale. I say scale, everything's in the same scale, but different heights and sizes.
Yeah, no, I get you.
So I use the Mini Compare to make sure that everything lines up. If I've got any ideas that works, so find what maybe shoulder pads would work, what weapons would be the right size. But it's only ever really like just gives me a starting point, because you never truly know until you've got the two parts there. But by that point, you've maybe already committed to cutting something up or even just buying the kit in the first place. So I try to do as much as I can using what I've got first of all. And then once I've got an idea, a rough plan of what I'm going to do, then I actually start getting the models themselves. And I keep all my bits on the sprue if I'm not using them, because it's just nicely organized. Everything's one place. If I've cut it off, it goes in a bits box like that's labeled up for that faction. But I try to keep things on the sprue, and then I will basically do like a sprue comparisons, which doesn't always work because of the angle that they are, or so I try to compare as much stuff as possible before I commit to actually removing anything, which sometimes you do it and it works great. Sometimes you do it and you're like, that doesn't work now. So this is before I've even built anything. I just have everything laid out on a table, just in bits, and I kind of choose blue tack and compare what works, what doesn't work, hold it from different angles, you dry fits. And that's just for a model where I don't really need to do much in the way of, so for example, the Conrad Kurz video, that also had a lot of kind of thinking about how can I create a lore that makes sense for this? Whereas the Vulcan one's a little bit easier on the lore, because just if he's just formed to chaos instead. So how would a demon version of him look? So yeah, it just becomes a case of lots of trial and error. Some things I go down the path of, and I'm like determined I'm going to go a certain way, and you get there and it just doesn't work. So I settled on using a Croxagore head, but I originally was going to plan on using the Stormcast Dragon Riders, like one of the heads from there.
Oh right, yeah.
But the heads just aren't chunky enough, and you've got no neck. So yeah, I'd have to either sculpt the neck or get the neck from somewhere else. So my initial thought for the whole process was to use those. And when I came to actually doing a comparison against the torso, it was like, this isn't going to work. So I had to then go, what else can I use? And I went back to that whole process and compared everything again. And it is very iterative. You'll find yourself going down the line, and once you get to a certain point, at that point you stop and you're like, okay, well, it's either going to be used or it's not, and I have to start again.
Yeah. Is it that kind of like butterfly effect thing where you think it's going to go one way and then you make one decision, like the head, for example, you do a swap, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh no, that means this is wrong. And then you're like ticking boxes.
Yes, that exactly what happened. So I settled on the head, and the head was great, but then the head's a lot bigger now. So then I need to bulk up the shoulders and bulk up the arms. It's quite a slender model. So I had to put Centaurian shoulder pads on him instead. And then the arms looks really thin, so I've had to bulk them out with extra armor plating. So he's got bigger arms now. It's the same kit, but I've just added to it to make it look a bit chunkier. And then the chest didn't look right, so I had to put like a different chest plate on. And sometimes it kind of spirals to the point where you're thinking, this is like, I should have just like started with a different model. But I've got to every now and again, it does just work perfectly. And sometimes you'll have a plan, you'll get the bits and everything just lines up and the stars align. And it's a very straightforward process, but it's very rare that happens. And sometimes in the videos, I'll be like halfway through, I won't realize something isn't working until I'm 5-10 steps ahead. And I have to say in the video, well, I'm going to put this on now, but don't do this yourself. But I've got to explain why for the next like 5 minutes of footage, that piece is there. But then I realize I can't keep that piece because it's going to intersect with something else. So I do try to include those mistakes in the videos because it's not a straightforward process. I think some people think
no, but I think that's good though because it's a very honest, creative representation of what the thing is. It shows you those trials and tribulations. I always say it's the iceberg effect. People see the end result, but they don't see all the stuff beneath the waves or that isn't immediately discussed that led to that stuff that people see. Does that make sense? So I think it's good that you do include that because it shows a very natural, honest approach about it, which I think is good.
Yeah. Do you try to go, because obviously your videos are quite instructional. Have you ever thought about like incorporating that as kind of part of the video? Because one thing that I'm always interested in, especially now that we're filming our own tutorials, is like how much of the mistakes do I include so that people can learn from them versus how much do I make this just a definitive guide for someone? Because I think if someone's like on YouTube searching like, oh, how do I paint the New Emperor's Children? And then it's like 25 minutes of me going like, tried this pink, God, it didn't work. Don't do what I did, you know?
So one thing that I've contemplated doing, I've never really tried it though, and it might work well for you actually, is if you maybe at the end, like, so you do like a full, this is like, if you watch this from start to finish, you'll get this at the end. But then maybe at the end you can be like, well, this is some of the things I tried that like didn't make the cut. This is like almost like the extra bits. Yeah. So you can be like, well,
like a blooper reel almost.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. But like a blooper reel for the process rather than the actual like filming or anything.
It's a great idea. Yeah.
Because people do make mistakes and sometimes knowing how to, so the reason why I include those things is because I want to show people if you do glue something in place, well then how do you remove that easily? How can you remove that without damaging the rest of the model? How can you assemble things in a way which is going to reduce that impact later on? So sometimes I'll only partly glue things, and then once I'm set on it, I'll kind of go back with a little brush applicator and kind of put a bit more glue on them just underneath the gaps just to kind of strengthen everything up. But yeah, it's finding that balance of making an interesting video.
Yeah, of course.
So that's why I don't really tend to include much of the planning phase, because it is just mostly just hours of me on my phone just going just scrolling through like Games Workshop website or bits resellers to find like what bits work well for that.
Yeah, definitely. So we on the last episode we spoke about obviously converting a bit, and I'm a little bit of a hoarder when it comes to parts.
A little bit is really underselling yourself, James. Don't sell yourself short.
Okay,
come on.
I'm a hoarder when it comes to parts. All right, okay. Like really, the store you just saw is my parts department. I'm only kidding. Yeah. But what we were talking about is that like, do you you said you leave parts on the sprues. Mm-hmm. Do you, once you finish the project you're doing, do you then remove all of those and then bag them up into faction specific bags, or do you keep them on the sprues?
So I have the 9 litre really useful boxes.
9 litre.
9 litre ones. They're the perfect size for putting 2 sprues next to each other. So you can get like 2 piles of sprues in there.
Yeah.
So I have, my garage is full of them, and I've got little labels on them which say which faction they are. And then if I've got like a large faction, I've got loads of Space Marine stuff. So that's broken down into, so I've got a box that's got anything that's got Gravis armor in it.
Yeah.
A box of Phobos armor, a box with like Tacticus armor. I've got a vehicle box. I tried to do it with Horus Heresy, but it was like, it's just so many variations. Yeah. So I was like, oh God.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've got those and they've got all labeled up. So I know that, so I do still need to look for that component. So if I clip it off the sprue and I haven't got it anymore, sometimes I have actually gone back and glued it back onto the sprue.
Really?
Just because it keeps it nicely organized.
No, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. I suppose because they're all numbered as well. You can literally, that's a really good point actually. Never thought that. Wish I hadn't clipped them all off. No, I basically, when I was doing my like chapter and stuff, I've said this the other week, like I'd be clipping sprues and getting rid of stuff with sprues, and I'd find that part that's maybe a little bit different. Like I was saying, like in one of the sprues, I think you said it was like the Hellblaster kit. There's like the only left-handed bolt pistol
in
the Hellblaster kit. And it's like when you go through the sprues, you'll find those parts that are essentially rarer. They're like the Blastoise or the Charizard.
The shinies,
they're the shinies.
It's
so
weird because sometimes
like,
they're not particularly unique, but they're unique in dexterity.
Yeah.
Simple things like that. Like the bolt pistol is as generic as it gets, but trying to find a left-handed one is a nightmare.
Yeah.
So as an example, the reason why I wanted a left hand that had like a clenched fist is because I was doing a banner bearer and I wanted the banner to be in the left hand as opposed to the right hand.
Right.
So I literally wanted an arm with an outstretched hand that looked like it was firing, but then I could cut through drill the hand out
put the pole through.
how to put the pole through, etc. But I couldn't find a left-handed because all the chainsaw ones tend to be closer to the body rather than outstretched. So like what I was going to get at is you said obviously about keeping them all on sprues or keeping them gluing bits back on, but do you have like a box that is like your top parts, that like the ones that you're like, oh, that's a really rare bit, or that's like, or do you just literally leave it all on sprues?
So I try to leave as much on the sprues as possible.
Okay,
if I get down to a sprue where maybe I've got like 5 parts on that's when I will go into a like bits box, just because it's easy to find then. But I do have rares.
Yeah.
It's so I've got it's mainly the Space Marines, like I say.
100%.
There's so much stuff, but so I've got a Primaris Space Marines box. It's one of those like fish and tackle boxes. And I've got all like the best parts are like so they're all organized depending on what they are, so I can easily find them. So I've got a box of left hands, a box of right arms, and heads with helmets and helmets off. And those are where I put the good parts normally. So I know that I can go back into there. But I think that's the thing as well. It's surprising how often I come to a dilemma like you had, where you're thinking, I need a left-handed bolt pistol, and there's none.
Yeah, I know.
It's just so few.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. Do you know what I think? Another take. I know obviously there's a reason for this law-wise potentially, but like, do you know one of the things that like I think is I think it's two-faceted. I think first facet is because of the molding process, and you've got perfect experience obviously with your dead animal bits, but there's not a lot of left-handers in 40k. So like you don't.
Are you feeling left out? You're a lefty.
This isn't biased because I'm left-handed. But, you know, what I mean is that you don't really have the ability to see like a lot of different poses. One of the like it's like one of the things that really like for me was stand out. There was a Death Guard upgrade box, or not upgrade box. There was a Death Guard set of 3 models where it was like 3 specific Death Guard poses.
Okay, yeah, I remember that one. Yeah,
and there's a left-handed melter gunner in that box. And it's just like when you find things like that, like a rarity of either pose or rarity of part, I think it's really important to.
They're a bit of a sleeper part because they don't
do you know
look.
What I mean? Like,
they're not necessarily that interesting, but
you go, oh, I could do that with that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and I think that's one of the things that like I that's one of my favorite parts about converting. It's not just the actual. I'm creating something.
I think it's a skill in itself, the part selection, though. It's not something to overlook.
It's 100. The curating of the parts is 100% like that. That is what makes the conversion or the finished result work as well as it does. It's because you've linked that part to that part and go, well, if I put that arm on there and do that and do that and do that, it makes this kind of result. And I think that's in itself a huge skill to be able to literally just extrapolate and break down something that you literally just spot and go, oh, I could use that for that. Like you said, I would never have thought that you'd go, I'm gonna make Fulgrim into a Chaos Volk. Do you know what I mean? It's like I think it is a big thing to be able to do that in itself.
Do you have a method for finding parts? If you maybe if you don't have it like in the encyclopedia of your brain of memory of where a certain bit is. Say you was like, this might be a bad example, but say you was like, oh, I need some antlers for this conversion that I'm doing.
Yeah.
And you don't have any idea what like kit has antlers in it.
Yeah.
Have you got like a method for trying to track them down? Yeah,
so there's a couple of bits websites that I do. They're the bits resellers, the ones who cut stuff off and sell them individually. So they normally have like search engines in them. So there's one in the UK, Bits Box, that I use, but they don't always have everything on there. And then you also there's another one which is like called Megabit Shop, but it's a German website. So sometimes I've had to go and get the German translation of what I'm looking for, because they have an English one, but sometimes the translation, the exact isn't what you think it would be. So I can't think of any examples. So you almost have to find different translations for the parts, and they will give you a big list. But the problem is, so I wanted a hammer. So I just typed in hammer, but then because the way they categorized all their pieces was Warhammer - Space Marine.
Oh no.
Everything came up. I was like, oh, okay. So it doesn't always work. Sometimes if it's not on there, it's a case of going on Games Workshop website, looking at the sprue shots and like zooming in as much as you can. And then some of it is just experience.
Yeah.
But, the biggest overlooked part of, I think, is you've got to look at the bits not for what they're intended to be, but more of what their shapes are, what their constituent parts are. So you might have an arm, but then you're thinking, well, that arm is, you've got a hand there, you've got the weapon that you've got on that hand, you've got an elbow or a forearm, and the more you can look at the bits for their constituent parts, the more versatility you can get from what you've got. It does require a bit more clipping and adjusting and to get those parts together, but that's the next step from just using parts from one Space Marine kit with another Space Marine kit.
Right.
It's looking at the parts not for what they're intended to be, but for what they're made up of.
Right.
Yeah.
So just to pick that apart a little bit then, as an example, so if you had a bit that was a Space Marine arm holding a a plasma pistol or something, you wouldn't look at that as, oh, that's a plasma pistol arm. You look at that and go, okay, right, well, that's a 45-degree elbow joint and a closed fist and a plasma pistol and a shoulder joint.
Yeah.
And then you're going to start cutting that bit up into even smaller pieces.
Yeah, exactly.
And then combining bits together.
Yeah, so the most recent example I can think of is I did a rebuild, like repose of the apothecary biologist, the Gravis one. And I wanted him to be looking, so the model looks to the right, it's got his outstretched bolt pistol. But I wanted to kind of change it so he was facing to the left. And I couldn't really do much with the legs all that much. So what I did is so the Absolver bolt pistol is quite unique, really. It's only on, I think the Chaplain has it, and then the Apothecary does as well. So he's got Gravis arm, so I had to still use the forearm. So I basically cut away the forearm and then got another Gravis armor arm that was holding a bolt rifle, and then cut that at the elbow. So then combine those two parts together. So I completely changed the pose of the weapon, because I wasn't like, oh no, this arm's only a right outstretched arm. If I take this part, because a forearm and a hand is pretty much going to be the same if it's held there or if it's held out. There's nuances with like maybe a human, but the armor of the Space Marine masks that a bit.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And it creates those segments and those cutting points that
it's the silhouette or the shape, the visual that looks correct as well. Like believe it or not, like I'm sure you agree, but getting the anatomy and something anatomically correct makes a conversion even better, rather than, because like I was saying the other day, and this is where part selection and like making sure anatomy is correct is good, is because if you don't do that, you end up with the Marine that you've picked an arm from a different kit where either the scale was different, or it might be an old arm. You were saying the other week about like Firstborn stuff compared to Primaris as an example, and you like, it might look there or thereabouts correct, but then when you really look at it properly, like, well, his left arm looks smaller than his right arm. Do you know what I mean? So exactly, I don't go to the links that you do where you cut the arms and like join two arms together and stuff like that. I haven't got the patience for that, but yeah, that's really interesting that's the way you approach it. That's like looking at parts the way you do, as in not just, oh, it's a plasma pistol arm. It's an arm at this angle and it's got the shoulder pad tilted this way and like the hands gripping it this way, or like
that's really changed how I think about parts now.
It's also it seems strange thing about it, but the way that a lot of the time when someone's doing traditional painting, they'll use a mirror to do like a self-portrait, or to look at like animators often use a mirror to look at the facial features. And don't be afraid if you're trying to do a pose, try to recreate that pose yourself, because if you can't recreate that pose physically, this is the advantage of most species in Warhammer 40k being humanoid, is you can kind of like recreate. I've literally held a rolling pin and to try and hold it in a certain way to say, well, how would my arm, where would my elbow be if I was holding it a certain way, so that when I rebuild an arm from the parts, I can make sure that everything looks natural. And it's a really surprising part, but actually seeing if you can recreate those poses yourself, you're like a bit of a Wally doing it when you kind of stood in your kitchen with a rolling pin, like, oh, if I hold it like this, how does my arm go? Or where's my shoulder go? Or then how does my weight shift when I do that?
No, you're right.
But it's the easiest way of kind of working out if that pose works, and it can mean a massive. There was one which worked really well. It was an old Kill Team one that I did, and it was a Valhallan Kill Team, and I combined a couple of arms with a torso. And it had his arm reaching around his back to like go to a pouch, and I had to recreate that pose myself to make sure that it looked right. And it was probably one of the best posed models that I did, using parts that weren't intended to be together. And I felt it's just because I took the time to make sure is this something that someone could comfortably do? Is this a natural way that they would lean if you were reaching behind your back?
That makes perfect sense.
So yeah, don't be afraid to like stand up every now and again and like grab a rolling pin and see if you can actually hold a staff or a sword or something in that particular way.
Have you got a favorite character from a book or piece of artwork and thought to yourself, if only that had a miniature? Custom Service is our character creation brand here at Siege Studios. Custom Service is not just a kitbash. We create miniatures using traditional hand sculpting alongside conversion for entirely unique and bespoke miniatures that will blow you away. Our talented team of sculptors methodically and meticulously bring your thoughts into reality with the precise, refined, and sharp work you'd expect from a digital sculpt, and pair that with our world-class painting team for an incredible display piece you'll be proud to own. To bring your character to life and get a quote now, head to siegestudios.co.uk or head to the link in this episode's description. Okay, before we close out the show, we're going to jump over to Hobby Hacks, which is our quick segment where we give yourselves like a little quick tip if you're hobbying along while you're listening to the podcast. And traditionally, we do this from our guest. So, Pete, have you got a hobby hack from us? You've dropped so many through the episode, but we have to get the segment in.
Yeah. So I think sculpting is one of those things that I've more recently got into, and there's a lot of mistakes that I've made on the way for that one. So I think a very, very simple one is if you're ever doing anything with green stuff, always. So I used to use water, but I found that like Vaseline, just a very small amount of Vaseline can massively make things easy to work with. It stops the stickiness.
So if you like put it on your tools and stuff,
put it on your tools, fingers. If you're rolling it out onto a surface, you put it on a surface, and once it's cured, you can then like remove it quite easily. You just rub your finger over it. If you don't put too much on, some people say you can use Nivea as well, like Nivea hand cream.
That's quite clever.
It's a lot of people don't.
I've tried water, but obviously it dries really quick.
Yeah, so. Exactly. That's a good. It stays kind of workable for a lot longer. But also, when you've mixed up some green stuff, leave it to partly cure for a bit. Because if you use it straight away, it just is either too sticky and doesn't get right. You can also freeze green stuff if you've made too much of it.
Really?
Yes.
Can you? I didn't realize that.
Was it like pause the reaction?
Yeah. So if you, the amount of people I've seen who've like mixed up far too much, I've done it loads, and then you'll be like, oh, I've made too much now for this little bit. If you pop it in the freezer, it will last for. It still cures, but a lot slower. So I think you can maybe get about a week out of it.
That's pretty good though.
Yeah. I mean, that's a hack within a hack. I mean, that's like,
I always end up making like a bunch of tactical rocks or something.
That's exactly it. Yeah, literally, I'll mix up, use what I'm using, and then I'll go, I'll just make some stones for the bases. Or
that would be handy though, because there's so many times where I need like a minuscule amount of green stuff or something, which is like an unreasonable amount to mix up. So the idea of like having a little tub in your freezer of some like ready to go green stuff, just so I can get like 0.005 millimeters of it off.
It's always great though when my wife goes in, like, have you put green stuff back in the freezer? It's just in the ice tray at the top.
That's incredible.
Get home, you're trying to put the shopping away. There's a whole bunch of green stuff.
Summer comes along, you get the ice cubes out, you put them in your drink, and it's like a bit of green stuff and a bit of ice just floating in your drink.
You've got to be really careful though, because when they're kind of rolled up into like a ball and frozen, they're like peas. So if you like frozen peas in there, so it's like if you ever bite down on one, it's a little bit harder. It's just green stuff.
You know why?
Yeah, don't have peas at my house.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's always great. And I suppose another one within that as well is if you mix green stuff with milliput as well, create like mixtures of that makes, I always find that mixture is really good.
It's really good.
You can do like sanding and filing and stuff as well.
Yeah, the finishing part of smooth, that's what makes it for painting even better, because you can sand, because it absorbs the problem. You get this weird hybrid of like the ability of the green stuff, but with the almost like a ceramic-y kind of like finish. Yeah. So you can smooth it, which just makes the paint job smoother once you've smoothed it as well, which is good. And I used Tamiya sanding foam on it as well.
Yeah, I use like a really like fine grit.
Yeah, like 1,000 or 1,200 or something like that. It's really, it works really well.
Awesome. Okay, well, on that note, we'll round out the show there. Massive thank you for Pete for coming on the podcast. Check the link in the description for your dead animal bits. You got your Colourforge can as well.
I have, that's also there. Yeah, it's keeping the brand Dead Animal Bits going.
If you haven't for some reason seen Pete's channel, go check it out. You do some awesome kit bashes and stuff.
Yeah,
and
I can't wait. I can't wait for the Fulgrim Vulcan. I can't wait. That's going to be amazing.
But I will say, if you want to get even more from Pete, we're going to jump over now to the post show, which is a benefit for our patrons. We do an additional 20-30 minutes of the podcast every single week, and you get some exclusive content over there, and of course access to our tutorials, which you've heard about in the ads from this episode. But otherwise, we will catch you next week.
I kind of get stuck in the rut with painting. It almost feels like the bit at the end of the video that I have to do to kind of get that end goal.
As a kit basher, having plain parts is probably a better starting point.
So you've touched on a subject that I feel very strongly about.
Oh,
so
okay. Yeah, let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go.